JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley, the host of Talking Books Show on Web Talk Radio. And today I'm delighted to welcome Colonel Charles Cone from Northville, Detroit, Michigan in the United States of America to talk about his book, A Burning Desire to Fly. And I have to say, Charles was 100 years young back in January this year. So he's a century old, everybody. There you go. And he's still batting and he's still in the crease. He certainly led a very interesting life. And while I've been chatting to him over the last few weeks, what a life it's been. So, who is Colonel Charles Cone? And what's the history behind the book, which is really a brief memoir, a kind of an autobiography, I suppose, of his long life and his many, many experiences? Well, who do I ask? Well, the best person to ask is Charles himself. So I'm going to ask Charles to come on the show. Charles, would you care to come and join me on the show?
I certainly would. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
You're very welcome. So, Charles, who are you and what's the backdrop? What's the history to this book of yours? Why did you write it?
Well, it's, as you have said, it's a memoir. And my son had asked me to write some small stories of what my bringing up was, because it's so much different than his family in Texas. They're all fairly well-to-do and positions of high positions. And, I was born in a desolate farmhouse in Western New York with no electricity or other utilities, none whatsoever. And so I started writing little installments for him. And after about 20 installments, I thought, what the heck, I might as well write a book. Because many people had suggested that I do that. I don't know why, I'm not a big storyteller, but apparently I told enough stories that people thought there's something here for a book. And anyway, that's how the book got started. After 20 installments, I decided to write a book. And it's totally out of my character. I'm a numbers person. I'm not a writer. I'm not a literary person. But with the help of one of my daughters, who's a school teacher, whose emphasis is on political correctness and proper terminology, she helped me write the book. So anyway, that's the story. I wanted to become a Navy pilot, and nobody knows how that came about. I was about 10 years old, probably, or 11. And being out in the country where no electricity or anything, you're not really up to date on current policies and practices and politics and all that sort of stuff. In fact, you just dig in the ground to earn a living, and that's your primary purpose. So my folks had never gone through sixth grade even, and so my dad was a sharecropper, and how I came about, somehow or another, some seed was planted to be a Navy pilot. I knew that I didn't qualify for any flying jobs because I had hay fever, but I just kept on going. I said, the good Lord is going to make sure I become a Navy pilot some way or another, and so I worked at it. I never doubted in a minute that I wouldn't make it. I was kind of small of stature, and so I had a rope hanging from the gambled roof of the barn, and I went hand over hand on that rope twice a day. And eventually I added some weight to my shoulders because I wanted to be strong enough to be a Navy pilot. I went to high school. First of all, I went to a one-room schoolhouse, all 8 grades in one room. The maximum enrollment was 27, so there weren't very many per class, and that was my beginning. We didn't have encyclopedias. We didn't have. I remember the dictionary had pages torn out of it, but somehow or another, some of us made it, so to speak. Anyway.
So you spent 6 years in the Navy and then you decided, not for me. I'm going to join the US Air Service.
Yeah,
And that's what the book is really about, isn't it?
yes. And I rode a milk truck that came around each morning to pick up milk from the farmers and to take it to a dairy in Rochester, New York. I rode with him, and I walked down the street from the dairy to the to the office of procurement for V5 for flight aviation cadets. And you can imagine a farm boy looking up at all the tall buildings, and I was ignorant. I was really bad. I walked into the office there, and I saw all these nice people dressed cleanly, and I thought that's not for me. So I turned around and left, went back to the dairy, and I was in the men's room and just finishing up when a lieutenant came in and asked me how things were going, and I said, "Oh, they're going okay." I lie, and he said, "Well, what position? Where are you on the process?" And I said, "Well, actually, I haven't started." So he took me back to the little Wave and got me started that day. Wave was a receptionist, a Navy lady in World War II, and for the day, I passed all of the mental and physical exams of the day, and I was through. Before I was through, I was trying to answer every question. Naive farm kid. I tell you, I can't say that enough. But anyway, I came across a disease, a venereal disease, and I didn't know what that was. So I went to ask this little Wave, and I said, "I don't understand this." And she said, "If you don't know what it is, you never had it." So answer no. And anyway, that was one of the things of the day. And anyway, she said I had one last thing to do, and that was to see the psychologist. The psychologist was that lieutenant who got me started. And I had started flying because I rented a farm next to our farm, raised beans, which were very lucrative cash product for that part of the year. The all of the draftees ate a lot of beans, and so I started flying. And the lieutenant asked me why I was starting to fly if I was going to be a Navy pilot, and I said, "Well, the Navy may reject me along the way, and I'm going to fly anyway." So he wrote on a form a burning desire to fly. That phrase carried me through all of my physicals for the next 2 years as an aviation cadet and beyond. So that's why the name of the book. That's where it originated from.
Okay, let's open the book, everybody, and let's have a look at this book. Now, there are 51 concise chapters to this book, and it's highlighting significant moments in Charles's century of life. As I say in all my interviews, I have no intention of dipping into all the chapters, as that's not the purpose of the interview. The purpose is to give you a flavour as to what you can expect. So we've chosen a few chapters for us to go and explore so as you can get a feel for the book. Um, give you a brief insight so you can ascertain for yourselves what you think this book is about, enough to tease you. So, if you want to know more, go to Charles's website and, www.charlescombe.com. Go and have a look at the gallery section, everybody. That really is fascinating because you'll see the pictures of the planes there that he's flown, a little bit about his history, his background, and why his love of flying, has been throughout his whole life. And yes, he's 100, and yes, he still flies. There you go, everybody. Um, so, Charles, let's open your autobiography and review chapters 1 and 2, which you head up family and growing up, respectively. Here you talk about your birth, your mother's death from complications to the birth, leaving your father a single parent, the farm your grandfather had and where you were raised, your stepmother and you siblings. Not all survived. Plus a brief history of who's who in the family. The experience of the German Shepherd dog at 3 years old, that was interesting. Running away from home, chopping wood for the fires, school, summer days, and New York State. So you really had, oh, and taking on your first mortgage for $10,000, everybody. There you go. And the bikes. Oh, his bikes. His $3 bike, everybody, which he did for his paper round, which was 25 miles. So, Charles, tell the audience a little bit about your early childhood and did you love them? And, does family mean an awful lot to you?
Actually, this was probably the most interesting part of what I wrote about. Reliving those days and thinking about how I really just bored on. I just kept on going and didn't know. I knew where I was going to go. I was going to be a Navy pilot. But the farm life was a tough life in those days. Uh, I sometimes uh, cultivating the crops. I would dig out a row, and my dad would complain about I was watching airplanes instead of where I was going. There was an airport about 5 miles from the farm. It was founded by Donald Woodard, who founded Jello Corporation, and it was a popular place to go. Amelia Earhart came there. She had an airplane there, and some other famous people like Roscoe Turner. They were all heroes of mine, and I watched those airplanes every morning and every day, all day long, coming doing loops and rolls, and made sometimes they'd make a practice emergency landing on our farm. Man, a 12-year-old kid or 10-year-old kid just ate that up. It just fueled the fire, fueled my brain, keep on going, and become one of those guys out there doing that sort of thing. So that was the early years, and it was hard work getting the hay out of the mow in the morning for the horses and the cows, uh, chopping wood every day because we had chunk stoves as the only heat we had. And you may not know what a chunk stove is, but it's a stove where you put a big part of a tree in instead of chopping it up. And that was a heat. We had one of those in every room. And I had to chop, once I became old enough, I had to chop wood every morning before I went to school. Um, and I had to draw water from a well that we had. Uh, that was okay in the summertime, but in the winter it was pretty tough to pump water with the ice on the handle and stuff. And anyway, it was a crude existence. For instance, we never brushed our teeth or anything until about the fourth grade. A visiting nurse told my family about personal hygiene, and so we started brushing our teeth and clean. I don't know how many people have gone through that sort of thing, but probably today not that many. Uh,
Mm.
it's, it was interesting,
And of course, you talk about in
and
the book, your dad taking a mortgage out on the farm, for $10,000. He took a risk there, didn't he?
oh yeah, that was, he never had a bank account, just had cash, whatever he could get. And for instance, the car we had was at least 10 years old and cost $35, and he managed that. But when when they wanted him to buy the farm for 10,000, that was just beyond his comprehension at that time. But the owners son and daughter-in-law were good friends of my dad, and they knew that he wouldn't leave the farm. So they encouraged him to get that $10,000 loan, and he did that. $10,000 was included all of the cattle, the farm, the house, uh, everything. An unbelievable amount of money, but in the Depression days, 10,000 was quite a bit. And he decided to do it, and he was a very industrious person, and eventually he owned all of the land for about a square mile. Because as friends of his, the neighbors died, or before they died, he'd make propositions to them. For instance, one of the guys didn't have any electricity or anything anyway, like the rest of us, and my dad said, "I'll pay you $50 a month for the rest of your life if for the land. And the gentleman was pretty old at that time, so my dad, figured, well, maybe 3 or 4 years of that he could do. Anyway, the guy sold him the land, and he bought all the land except for what two spinsters owned up in the far corner where I rented the land from them. Actually, they wouldn't sell, so he became owner of everything except that. Um, anyway, I'm babbling on here. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, it's life back in the 1920s, isn't it?
Yeah.
1930s, of course, in America, it was the Great Depression, the 1930s. So it'd been very, very tough for you and your family. And especially, on the farms. And yeah, in wintertime in the New York State, the snow must be 6 or 7 feet high. How difficult that was. Anyway, let's move on, Charles, to chapters 6 and 7, reporting for duty and moving on up. Now, these stories are about your Hobart college days, Washington, D.C., and being caught out in the cockpit of a P-80, I believe, the air base at Patriot, 30,000 sailors and pre-flight lessons, Texas, where you got your primary and intermediate flight training. Los Angeles, of course, and writing your first check. Well, drunk driver, steerman biplanes, your landing experiences. Charles, talk us through, this part of your life here.
Yes, I graduated from pre-flight in California, and a friend of mine and I decided to hitchhike to our next base, which is Corpus Christi, Texas, where we would start our flight training. And we hitchhiked down Highway 101, which is a very famous highway along the Pacific coast. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure which, but we thought we were going to die because the driver that picked us up was drunk as could be, and we were in a convertible, making some unusual positions on the road. But anyway, when we stopped for him to eat, we snuck out, and one of us distracted him while the other got our baggage out, and we then continued on to Los Angeles. I saw a radio show, and that was a big deal because this is long before television, and we had a radio at home. My dad hooked up an aerial with a storage battery as a battery from its car. And so now I was seeing things, and my eyes were wide open. I just was eating it all up. Anyway, we left Los Angeles. We decided not to hitchhike the rest of the way to Texas, which would have been a pretty long drive. We arrived in Texas, and the first thing that met me was a pile of clothes, bloody soaked, on a table at the bay where our rooms were. And the upperclassmen wanted it. That was their trick. They said this belonged to a guy yesterday who was killed in a spin, and just leading us on. It was a fake, but anyway, the upperclassmen had a lot of fun with some of us. So I started flying with a Stearman biplane, open cockpit, my favorite airplane to this day, even though it was 75, 80 years ago. It was a nice time. I wanted so bad to be a Navy pilot. I wanted to be a Navy pilot more than anybody else in the world, and nothing was going to stop me. And I just, whatever came up, I handled it. And I was a little concerned about my flying inverted. So I talked to my instructor, and he says, "Go out and get drunk. Forget it. You're doing great." He says, "Relax. don't worry about it. You're doing okay." So it came time for my solo. My three roommates had all failed their first check ride for solo from the same instructor, a Marine Lieutenant Wood. And when it came my turn, I got the same lieutenant. And I thought, well, this is going to be an experience. And so we went out and he tried to teach me to land the airplane his way, which I could not do. And eventually, I think he figured it was going to either be death for him or death for me. And he said, "Do it your way." And so I did. I made three perfect landings my way. And we pulled over to the side, and he said, "Go kill yourself," which the sweetest words I'd ever heard, because that meant I was going to solo and I'd passed the check ride. That was the major experience probably in my primary training. From there, we went to a T6 in the Air Force, SNJ in the Navy, and it was our advanced trainer. And before we flew, they readied us with blind cockpit check, which meant that you're blindfolded and they'd say point to an airspeed indicator or some instrument, and you had to point to it blindfolded. So we were well prepared when we went on our first flight, but stupid me. We take off, and to pull the power back after takeoff to reduce the RPM. And instead of reducing the RPM, I shut the engine off. It was pretty quiet. We were only a couple hundred feet in the air, and the instructor naturally got it started again. But the whole flight was very silent. We didn't talk. On the way back to the operations shack after we'd landed, I finally mentioned to him that was I going to be washed out or would I make it? And he finally said, "We'll not talk about this anymore. We'll just continue on tomorrow flight again," which, that was good. I meant that I wasn't going to get washed out. I finished advanced training and we went on to Pensacola, Florida. The war had ended by that time, so they were extending our training by adding different planes on our schedule. One of them being a PBY. A PBY was in the Second World War. Picked up rescued people who had bailed out in the water, and I was the only cadet to ever solo a PBY. That meant taking out with my own pilot in command. And actually, I was a natural, I guess, for seaplanes. And the story there is that when we graduated, the officer in charge came with assignments, and he said, "I have 7 Corsair billets. Nobody asked, and I have 3 SBD dive bomber billets and 3 PBM billets, another big seaplane." My buddy next door to me said, "Yeah, I'm not going to fly uh, seaplanes or any other multi-engine. I'm going to volunteer for dive bombing." So he did. First name drawn out of the hat was his. And he was unhappy because he had given up the opportunity. The next name drawn out was mine, and I was PBM, and I was so unhappy. Nothing compared to what Daryl next door to me was. I went back to the officer in charge, said, "Keep my damn wings. I don't want to fly." But he gave me some sage advice. He said, "Whatever you do, wherever you are, do the best you can and things will work out for you." That was sage advice. And so I followed that advice. And I became the youngest patrol plane commander in the Pacific at that time, flying out of Saipan. And some of my excursions were a trip to Manila, where we were evacuating a typhoon. And we went through a typhoon. It knocked out all our communications, navigation equipment, turrets off the track, and one of the crewmen got a fractured skull. Anyway, so now we were boring on for 1,500 miles over the sea with no islands, no features of any kind to help us navigate. Besides that, we were in the soup and it was night, so we wouldn't have been able to see anything anyway. So we droned down for about 10 hours and we turned on the radar, which had its own power unit. We thought maybe that would work, and it was blank. So we were still droning on. And an hour or so later, we turned on the radar again and it showed some islands. So there's about 1,000 islands, I think, in the Pacific. in the Philippines, and we weren't able to determine which island we were to go to. And by that time, we were running very low on fuel, maybe 15, 20 minutes left. So we had to make a decision to bail out or crash land, and we decided to crash land and keep the radar on so we wouldn't run into an island, a mountain. And we landed. People had given us up for lost because they hadn't heard from us for 10, 11 hours. But we made it. And as we broke out of the clouds coming down, the bow turret sailor said, lights 15 degrees starboard. And that was Manila. I call it a miracle because we had no navigation equipment. It was all strictly by guess and by God. So that was one of the first experiences that I had there in the Pacific. I was in China when the Communist Revolution was ending. In fact, we were the last Americans out of China that day, Easter Sunday morning, 1949, when Zhou Enlai flew to, I think it was chosen at that time, it's Taiwan today, and the revolution was ended. We were had a detachment in Tsingtao, China. Half of the city was communist and half was free, and that was the last free property in China. That was interesting to us because the poverty was unbelievable. I wrote to my folks saying that it reminded me of the stories I read of England in the 12th and 13th century with open gutters and so forth. Anyway, when we went into town, we met two boys. One had his hands cut off and the other had his eyes gouged out. It was done by the parents, so the one could see to lead the one with the hands to beg. That's how poor it was in China at that time. Unbelievable. And the way the execution grounds for those that were caught was right behind our operations shack. And the last picture we had was my friend Filson took a picture of them executing a boy and a girl, probably 15, 16 years old. They'd been picked up the night before and was given the usual routine of marching through the city of Tsingtao that was free. And if nobody recognized them, they were sent to the execution grounds and executed. It's just unbelievable poverty.
Yes, I can imagine that. Charles, I want to take the audience on a little further here, in this amazing autobiography of yours, which is stuffed full of your life experiences. And for me, when I was looking at the book, I found it very hard to focus on what to include and what to miss out. But the storylines to chapters 12 and 13, the Pacific and Typhoon, kind of stood out for me. So I thought, let's explore this part of the book. Here I found you talking about your experiences in Hawaii, a Pacific squadron, Marianas Islands. You're 22 years old and have long held a desire to go to China, which you've already touched upon. Atomic tests at Bikini Atoll, the squadron commander's wife, Red Communists, your first experience of flying a Typhoon, Pacific Ocean hurricanes, the Philippines, faulty engines, and numerous other adventures, too many to mention. So, Charles, what are you telling the audience, the reader, about the happenings going on in your life here? You certainly have had some adventures in, chapters 12 and 13 here.
I think that the theme of my book, and I didn't write this intentionally, but it shows that anybody can do anything that they want to with perseverance and pluck. Stay with it, don't give up, and don't be distracted by little things like physical limitation or what have you. Just, I wanted to be a Navy pilot so bad, nothing could stop me. And I worried about that, but I just kept on going, and that's what I think people would see in the book. Maybe it's not the theme entirely, but it certainly is the overriding gist of the book. Keep on, go, do what you want to, and it'll work out.
Do you think now, when we have a little bit further down in the book, we get to chapters 22 and 23, and you're now married to Joe, to who you were married to for 69 years. And you head up these chapters, fatherhood and orders for career. Fatherhood brings a new aspect to your life, but you receive orders for career to fly B-26. You're now a lieutenant, and I know in America you say lieutenant, but we say over here lieutenant, um, which means leaving your new wife with a newborn child. Talk us through, Charles, the story of your life here. This was difficult for your wife, Joe, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And the as I reflect on that today, it was kind of selfish on my part to want to go to Korea. I had volunteered for every type of airplane in Korea. I had more overseas points than other people in the Air Force, so they never selected me. But finally, I was so fed up, I wrote a letter saying either discharge me or send me to Korea. And a telegraph came, Charles L. Cohn, repeat, Charles L. Cohn, no substitute authorized, and so on. The whole telegram was a repeat and no authorized changes. So now we have, at this time, a baby that's about 6 weeks old. And I reflect on it now and I think we didn't handle that very well. In fact, we didn't even think about it. I was going to Korea and I was going to come home and we'd live happily ever after. And that's just the way it was. We did, I think now, boy, leaving a wife with a baby in a strange country and all that sort of thing, kind of selfish. But we handled it. We didn't think a thing about it. I guess we both had complete faith that I'd be home and we'd live happily ever after.
Of course, your wife, Joe, I mean, she was a determined lady in her own right, wasn't she? She did her own things.
She was a natural leader. Wherever we were, she always ended up with either church organizations, school organizations, or some. She always rose to the top real fast. In fact, I made a point that this was not my career in the Air Force; it was our career. She was extremely important to me, and actually, she turned my life around. When I met her, I was a person who was very shy. I didn't go out on dates, and I missed out on a lot of opportunities for friendships. But when I met her at the casket, when I took my roommate bodies home, and she and this roommate had grown up together and were going to get married, our eyes locked, and they never unlocked from that point on. And we were married 9 months later, and our firstborn was a boy, and we named him Jim in memory of my roommate. we the day I was supposed to be discharged from the Navy, they were all killed. My crew was flying a substitute airplane, and one flap came up and the other one didn't. So they ended up diving into the ocean about 10 miles off of Port Loma in California. And I was given the opportunity, I say that with just, to go out every morning with the Marianne group, a ship that salvaged wrecks. So I went out with them to do the initial identification of the bodies as they picked them up. My roommate was the last one. And we had planned that night I was going to go home. I was going to be discharged, so I was going home to my home in Buffalo. And I was going to drop Jim off in Milwaukee on the way. Well, as it turned out, of course, I took his body home and met his girl. And that was a change in my life.
Mm. It's, that comes across very clear in the book, in these chapters 22 and 23, everybody. They're fascinating to read. Go and have a look at them. Now, normally when I do the interviews, I normally give the audience, the reader, an introduction as to what they can expect from the chapters that we're going to talk about. But on the odd occasion, I choose not to do that. And I'm not going to, so I'm going to do this exactly here. So I'm not going to say what I've seen in chapters 31 and 32. Ohio, zero, and the desire still burned about. I'm going to let you tell the audience what's in these chapters.
Yes, when I came back from Korea, uh, I was stationed at Grandview Air Force Base, which had no facilities, had two buildings, the headquarters building and one hangar. And that was it. I was going back to Grandview to fly B-57s, which is a twin jet British built airplane, and was replacing the B-26. Unfortunately, when I got there, the planes had already been transferred to Ogden, Utah. So the base commander said, "Never worry, I've got a job for you. I need a personnel officer." And I can't think of anything that was further from my mind than being a personnel officer and not flying. So I dug in as I had been uh, warned by my Navy lieutenant, do the best you can. So I studied and read the books and the regulations. And anyway, there was a fellow that was coming into the base to spend some time from Air Force Institute of Technology. And the base commander asked me if he could stay at my place because we had no other quarters for him. And I agreed. And somehow during our discussion, I don't know how that happened. But anyway, the lieutenant or the captain said, if you apply for school, I'll make sure you're in school. This is in June. By September. I thought, well, that's crazy. But anyway, I applied and took all the tests and so forth, and I was back in school at Ohio State in September. I I was just very fortunate. At this same time, I was offered an opportunity to fly with TWA, first pilot from New York to London. Wow, a dream job that I had been working for my whole life. And the Air Force said, "We'll send you to Ohio State." And I had to make a decision to go to school or fly. And I decided finally, my wife was very important in the decision, that I could always fly, but I couldn't always get an education. And as I mentioned, my folks never went through the sixth grade. And I was the first one to go to high school. So education was extremely important to me. And I selected to go to Ohio State. That worked out very well. Following that, of course, I wanted a flying job, and the Air Force said, "You can't have a flying job. You got to do what you're trained for at Ohio State, be an engineer at a base." And my brother-in-law had met a colonel from the Pentagon in California where he had a business, and somehow they were talking about me and our assignments. And this colonel said, "Well, if he has any problem, just have him give me a call." Now, I would never think of calling somebody like that. But this was a time now when I've got an assignment to be an engineer and I want to go fly. I called the Pentagon, not knowing this colonel. I'd never heard of him or had no idea who he was. I didn't even know whether he was still in the Pentagon or not. But anyway, it was fortunate enough I hooked up to him. So I asked him if he remembered his discussion with my brother-in-law about if I had some need, call him. And I said, "I've got some need, I'm calling." And he said, "Okay." He asked me, of course, what I wanted, and I told him I wanted to fly B-47s. And he said, "Okay, that's good." changed my orders to B-47s, and the Institute said, no, no, you got to go be an engineer. So I called him again, and he said, forget the engineer stuff. You're going to go fly B-47s. And that's what I did. I ended up flying B-47s, which was a career step for me. I decided to stay in the Air Force and make it a career. And I was a flight commander and acting squadron commander and so forth, flying B-47s. And they were phasing out B-47s, and our assignments would be up on the northern border, like down Michigan, down Maine, and North Dakota, and anyway, northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan. None of which appealed to me because I didn't want to fly B-52s. I'd had enough career time. And so I called AFIT. And no, what I realized was that people were being frozen to the base. They weren't getting a new assignment until they had been assigned to school. So I hightailed it over to the education office, which was across the street from our squadron, and said, I want another degree in engineering. And they said, no, you can't do that, but we got 6 master's degrees programs of which you're qualified for. So I took EDP and they sent me to Texas A&M, which was another career changing for me. I got through the master's program. I was the first one to get a computer science degree at Texas A&M. And I was sent to a place in Columbus, Ohio that worked directly with McNamara, who was Secretary of Defense at that time. And that worked out for me. I was promoted from a major through to full colonel while I was there. And I still wanted to fly in Vietnam. And I was on the phone with the Air Force personnel almost every day. And they finally gave me an assignment, fly B-66s, which was a twin jet. And the day I graduated from that training, I made full colonel. So they changed my orders from Vietnam to Randolph Field in Texas.
There must have been
Dream assignment.
there must have been, oh, he's on the phone again. Let's give him what he wants. Then at least stop phoning us.
I couldn't believe it. I was being assigned to Randolph, which is one of the first bases in the Air Force, in that plum assignment. But I eventually went to Vietnam and did my tour over there. And when I came back, I was unhappy at the assignment they wanted. They put me in. The general that I worked for in Vietnam, when I called me in one Sunday morning and said, I reported to him, and I remember the day I met him. He said, the only people I hate worse than weather people are computer people. And that Sunday morning when I walked into his office, he said, I remember what I told you, but he said, you've done one hell of a job. What assignment do you want? Who ever heard of General asking you what assignment you want and getting it? But I told him, and I got the assignment, which is in Montgomery, Alabama.
Very good. Charles, let's, as everybody, we are now moving on in the book here, advancing through the book at some pace because there's so much in this book and there's so much that Charles has done in his life. And I want to head off now to chapters 36 and 38, aptly titled B-47 Flying and B-52 No, Not the Band. And you talk about your experiences as fourth man position and some of the precarious situations you found yourself in and how the air industry was learning about significant design changes, for you, new aircraft from your experiences. I loved the story about Charlie. Your ass end is on fire.
That was one of
On
the
the
experiences.
B-52, Second Bomber Squadron, what's cracking off here? What's the stories in this part of the book? What's in these 2 chapters, Charles?
Well, I had some experiences in the B-47, which I seemed to have experiences in all of my airplanes that I flew. engine failures and so on, and fires. And I was going to make the first night JATO, which is jet assisted takeoff, at March Air Force Base, and it was at night. And so they wheels all the general from the division and all the colonels were all out on the ramp watching this takeoff. And everything went well. I uh, hit the button to fire the JATO, and it was a real kick. And about that time, the wing commander on the ground said, "Hey, Charlie, your ass end is on fire." Now that's an exciting little statement. And I could have ejected, and I ordered my crew to eject at that time, but the navigator injected downwards, and they had to have at least 400 feet, and I wasn't near 400 at that time. And so I told him, JD, I'll stay with the airplane as long as I can control it, because it was death to him if I bailed out. He had no opportunity to recover. And so it turned out that the fire went out. It wasn't really a fire at all. It was a JATO bottle had exploded and hit another bottle and exploded. So the black liquid agent was swirling around the airplane, and it blackened the airplane, but it didn't catch it on fire. That was one of the experiences that I had in B-47. I had another one where I was taking off on July 5th, 1949, I think it was. And as I broke ground, the airplane started shuddering. I couldn't read the instruments. I couldn't do anything except fly. And what had happened was the number 6 engine out on the tip had exploded. And I was able to hold the airplane. They sent out 31 instructor pilots from Wichita and gave them the same situation, and none of them could hold the airplane. So the good Lord watched over me once more and made sure that I could fly the airplane.
So
I was,
you
I
see,
was,
everybody, these are fascinating stories. They are really are fascinating stories. What goes on in the cockpit. Um, well, sometimes you don't want to know. Um, Sometimes, the pilots, they fly by the seat of their pants. Aren't I right? Sometimes you're
that's
flown
right.
by the seat of your pants.
That's right. You do what you have to do or what you think you have to do and just keep flying. And if you give up anywhere along the line, you're dead. It's 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 just fly the airplane to the accident. That's what Bob Hoover, a famous pilot, said. You fly the airplane to the accident, and of
Indeed.
course, hopefully, no accident occurs. Keep flying. Keep
So,
flying. Like all the rest of my life was just keep on keeping on.
and he still does fly, everybody. Now, Charles, finally, let's take the audience to chapters 44 and 45. Preparing for Vietnam and Langley by way of Montgomery. And here you're talking about your promotion to colonel, which you've already briefly touched upon, T-33 training, water survival, the woman with the baby broken down on the side of the road. That's a fascinating story. Randolph Air Force Base, a visit from a Pentagon general, and a health scare. A phone call on the 4th of July from the general who was head of all data automation in the Air Force, and off to Langley. Your life sure does have so much packed into it. Please, what's going on here? And I believe, am I right, that you were offered the position of a general?
Yes, I was. I was on the general's list, and I decided to retire because I was offered a position with AAA of Michigan, double my salary, and my youngest daughter would be able to go through all the schools without changing. My oldest daughter went through 3 high schools before she graduated, and my son was the same. They were always moved at times in the middle of the year, and it was trying to me. Although I'm sure the family never thought that I thought about it, but I was concerned about that. And uh, rather than take a job in the Pentagon, and I knew that I was told that I would be the chief of telecommunications for the White House, which, I guess most people would be thrilled at. I did not want to go to Washington, D.C. I did not want to be in the city. And I was just offered this position with AAA. So it was very difficult to tell my wife that we were going to retire because she was a very integral part of the Air Force career for me, and she was involved in a lot of things. But anyway, I retired on a Friday from the Air Force and started working on AAA on Monday as the head of the communications, telecommunications, and computer operations and all. It was a good move. Um, and I don't regret not taking general, but that's not too many people would turn down general. That's something that you work for. That's the epitome of the epitome, excuse me, of the career. But it worked out. I bought the house without my wife seeing it, and I'm still in the house now, 53 years later. And a couple of weeks before she passed, she said, "I really like that house," and that saved my bacon for sure because
Now,
she didn't see it.
I want you, Charles, to tell, because you've told me this story, and you went out and bought a plane, and you didn't tell your wife. Tell us that little
Yeah,
story. It's got nothing to do with the book, everybody, but this is an offshoot story. He went and bought a plane, didn't tell his wife, came home, says, I bought a plane. And he was in
yes,
the
I
doghouse for a while.
yes, yes. And the thing is, I never learned. I had a step back when I was first brought into the Air Force. There was an assignment to Athens, Greece, and people were volunteering for that, and I met all the qualifications, and I didn't volunteer. A lot of wives were unhappy that their husbands didn't volunteer for it was going to be at the embassy. And so we were at our neighbor's party one night, and the lady asked me, Charlie, did you volunteer? And I said, no, I did not. And my wife was very upset. She went home. And a colonel who was mentoring me said to her, that's a plum assignment, so somebody's going to take it along the way. Don't worry, he won't go. Then on a Saturday morning, the postman arrived with a big package that said, congratulations, your husband has been selected for duty in the Pentagon, in the embassy in Greece. So once again, she went home. And when I came here to Michigan, bought the house without her knowing it, and I was looking for an airplane to fly, and I bought this airplane. Well, I didn't have a chance to tell her I bought the airplane because I called a neighbor of mine who was the president of the bank and said, "Hey, Dean, you said buy the airplane, you take care of the financing." So he then told his wife, who was a neighbor of ours and a good friend of my wife, and she said, your husband bought an airplane. It was a cool reception when I got home because I didn't know that she knew that I bought an airplane. And anyway, I never learned. I was still a bachelor in some respects, in the decisions I made I felt were mine to make. But anyway, it turned out okay,
It
as
did,
everything else.
everybody. They were married for 69 years, so it must have turned out okay. Charles, I think we've given people enough of an insight as to what's in your book, your autobiography, your memoir, basically. Who would you like to see, reading your book?
Well, I think the theme of the book, as I mentioned before, is perseverance. Set a goal and work for the goal. And if it's a right goal, if it suits your capabilities at all, drive towards that goal and never give up. Don't think about possibilities of not making it. Make it. do it, go. And I would hope that that's what people get from the book. The stories, of course, I think are somewhat interesting. They may or may not be to some people, but the theme of the book is I set a goal and I'm going to make that goal and work diligently to meet it. That's all I can say, John.
Did you enjoy writing the book in the end?
Say again.
Did you enjoy writing the book
Yes, I
towards the
did.
end?
I enjoyed writing it, reminiscing on some things, and there's a lot of things I forgot. But for 100 years, it's kind of hard to remember everything. But it was kind of fun to reminisce about the farm life as a young kid who didn't have particularly good grades or good genes, I guess, to
Mm.
do what he wanted to do, but he did it and just set a goal and go for it.
Absolutely. Charles, where can people get your book from?
From Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or any other online bookstore. Uh, I appreciate it if they buy it and read about my stories. And they're all stories, they're not embellished at all. Uh, one of my people that encouraged me to write a book was a trainer, and she said, I said I don't really have a lot of things to talk about, and rather straightforward. She said, well, when you write the book, you got to embellish it a little bit. I did not embellish it. These are true stories, very raw and simple.
There you go, everyone. A Burning Desire to Fly by Colonel Charles Cone. I just want to say, Charles, thank you very much for coming on my show. I've thoroughly enjoyed reviewing the book. I've loved some of the adventures you did, and so some of the mishaps, where you lost comrades are very sad, and it's nice to see that you have included them as a measure of respect to them. So, Charles Cone, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, John, to have the opportunity to discuss the book with you. And enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe until next time.